Behind me is the apartment buildings that are at the exit to the walking trail that Sugi and I take here in Soripol. Now, walking on the mountain trail is our way of relaxing. It's really important to us in terms of just reducing our stress and just forest bathing. But when we come to the end of the trail, close to these apartment buildings, especially late in the evening, I'm often reminded of my brother. He ended up living in a couple of, this is a rather upscale neighborhood. We live a bit farther away in a more modest area. But my brother ended up living in a couple of quite nice apartments, really, when he was sick with his drinking. And on the one hand, he had a slightly luxurious lifestyle, thanks to the divorce settlement he got. But at the same time, he was kind of imprisoned in those places. And living that way, I think, made him worse. It made him more introverted, more stubborn, and more depressed. So that kind of luxury, having a place of your own, and a steady income, but no real sort of purpose in life, along with a substance abuse problem, is a very dangerous mixture. after winter and after the spring, after the summer, comes the fall.
Fade in. It's a cold day ending in downtown Montreal. The sidewalks are crowded with office workers and students, the employed and the employment wishing. There are others too on the street. They linger more than walk, and so, logically, they should be extra visible. Yet, in the eyes of the stressed out, society's bustling winners, this last group, impoverished and too degraded to expect a salary, discarded and loosened and loose change desiring, are, in the eyes of the healthy, the ranked successful, people who do not exist at all. But my brother sees them. He sees them with pity and multi-tiered fear. He, with his bad skin, bulging belly, dirty coat, smelly hat, is, in many ways, one of them. He wants what they're panhandling for. He's carrying it in a glass, heavy bag, in a plastic bag in his hand. But even though his attention is focused on them, the normal people disgust him. When he sees the homeless people's wrecked faces, francophone pale, Inuit tan, runaway red, his heart goes out to them. But despite this unfaked, comradely empathy, his anxious distance is primal, instinctive. His food supply, correction, liquid bread, shall not be shared, shall not be depleted, and so he carries the weighty plastic bag filled with bang clinking full liters of Colt 45 and, for good measure, 1 bottle of blue, and proceeds down Park Avenue, as determined to ignore the street people as the office types and pain virginal McGillers. The sidewalk is so frozen, it's slushy, then freeze-dried curlicues of kick-colored ice are striated into clumsiness-causing shapes. It's hard for pedestrians to keep their footing. "Got any change?" a person's voice says. My brother turns to it. A native guy, Indian or Inuit, he can't figure out which. My brother likes the man's voice. "Got some change there, buddy? I need something to eat." My brother looks at the homeless guy. His face is oval, his skin pocked. He has good features that have been kicked around. The homeless guy looks at my brother. He has pale skin with cheeks both white, with too much inside and rawly reddened by cold. But the reddening continues. It climbs up the bridge of his nose like an ant up a tree and is on either nostril like red lights on a toy car. And he has a big burly beard. The beard so thick it looks animal, rough and wild and flecked with additional substances. My brother looks at the homeless guy and knows he's a drunk. Inside his mind guts, shame that the homeless guy, whose eyes seem fixed on the plastic bag in his hand, with its 4-bottle content, knows him too. Shame at the certainty the guy sees right through him. This moment of humiliation suddenly bursts, a grenade of embarrassment. "Sorry," my brother mutters. He walks on. The streets, which are bare but covered with snow, continue. Earth, which has been continuing its spin, has moved Montreal further away from sunlight. And now the cloudy winter sky is at its deepest evening. The temperature drops another degree. The ice on the sidewalk hardens its unevenness. My brother hears a plaintively vulnerable cry, the mewing of animal baby, and spots a little cat. It's a tiny creature, perhaps an adult whose size has been limited by limited food. The cat's face, direct, humorless, ignorant of charm, looks right at my brother, and its mouth opening, teeth looking like model dinosaur fangs. It meows again, meows right into my brother's heart. My brother stoops to pet the dear creature, stoops with his blurry, badly coordinated balance. Clunk, heavy clink. The cat flees, and my brother, straightening, harumphing at this feline snub, doesn't notice his grip has loosened. Crash! The bag of bottles is snatched by the earth's gravity and breaks cleanly and multiply on the hard streets. Fuck! Fuck it! God damn it! God damn it! Fuck! Passers-by glance at my yelling bro and close their nostrils against the broken smell of beer. Fuck! My brother's rage is boundless and useless. Cold, cold, cold. He staggers another block and turns his head to the omniscient sky. It too has its way of blinking. Little flecks of snow, tiny with cold tentativeness, are falling from the sky. These little flakes, like spittle, fall on my brother's face, and a memory of childhood fills him with such absoluteness. It's recalled Ottawa, 1969. Walking with my mom and dad and me to a neighborhood rink. Outside sensations. The feeling in old, gone memory of living on a quieter, nobler planet. The feeling of great, pervasive quiet. The feeling, too, that the past equals the present and has the power to enter it. Inside sensations, our rickety home, our bright kitchen, skating for hours outside, returning to heat. My brother suddenly remembers the homeless guy and feels a big regret. He feels like he just let down a friend. He backtracks, his movements a little more agile than they've been recently. Like any addict, being denied his addiction cheers him up. But the homeless guy's spot is empty now. The past is shoveled aside by the present. Friendship potential is, these are the odds, usually bombed into oblivion by reality. My brother keeps walking, his face and hands turning more and more raw, and he leaves the present once again, and he walks down side streets that are concrete portals to childhood and past. Standing on the Eglinton Street viaduct at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday in February, Matz thinks of killing himself. Again. It's what he always thinks about at this time of day. Suicide lately has become his secret shame, his melancholy turn-on. Matt knows what the varieties of depression are, or at least he's developed an inner vocabulary for their forms. Some have the synesthetic quality of color associations. Blue doesn't do justice to the choleric sadness which will sometimes run through his bloodstream. Instead, he thinks of a greenish brown, some horrible dankness entering his system and starting a moist rot. But this is different. It's not a state of mind which may be triggered by candida-linked foods or drinks. Instead, it's what he thinks of as, quote, warm depression, unquote, a frame of mind akin to crawling under a blanket and at first feeling warm there, but then, like a kid in a fort, feeling secretly too alone. However, Matz can't pinpoint a specific psychological trauma which would equal his depression. No one he knows has died, at least no one he's close to. Matz is still young in an average sort of way. He cannot perceive even a glimmer of the disaster that awaits his brother Gordon. Matt's life is lame, but it is average, and its averageness is what frames his sense of existence. All this is before the weird time warp that one enters with familial lunacy. His brother drinking so ferociously that alcohol is setting fire to his already inflamed brain, while his mother, suddenly so changed in personality that Matz will think she's had a stroke or is now insane, enables Gordon's process of self-immolation every step of the way, her self-righteous doctor and friends egging on the whole tragic mess because they have determined she is, quote, competent, unquote. Matt's most obvious problems now are of a boring sort. Even though he's unemployed, he has always been able to adopt an attitude of laissez-faire fatalism toward cash. He knows that if worse comes to worst, he can ask his parents for help. Despite the ignobility of a 32-year-old requesting money from Dad, Matz isn't one to let his pride interfere with his ability to eat. Still, a hurt agony gnaws at him. He remembers his acquaintance, John, the bad poet who never really achieved the level of artistic competency he was aiming for, who finally got attention by slitting his wrists and proving he was a badass of depression. All those minimalist quatrains about blood and free verse scribblings about self-mutilation finally acquired some legitimacy. And Matz also wonders if there isn't more than a speck of artistic vanity which drives him to want to leap into the fame of a body sprawled on the ground. Ending it all would guarantee at least a modicum of notoriety on the local lit scene. But this isn't the point, and wasn't of John's suicide either. John had been seriously depressed for a number of years before the act. This was one reason why John and Matz were never close. John was too busy going on alcoholic binges for any real friendship to develop. So when Matz heard roughly a year ago that John had killed himself, he felt shock, the shock of those who hear what they thought was so likely that they'd never hear it. Matz looks into the distance. The sun, almost set, looks like a nickel dropped in a panhandler's basket, too small a denomination to help. Below, the cars of the Don Valley Expressway form a beautiful set of curved lines, two of the lines red, two white. The expressway looks like a ribbon of diodes, but behind Matz, on the viaduct, the rush hour traffic is malevolent. The cars make a swishy, air-like sound. They sound like rubberized hair dryers. They look vain and judgmental. Their headlights glow goadingly as if to disapprove of Matt's poverty and bad skin. Suddenly, grief pools behind Matt's eyes. He's not sentimental enough to think the cause is John, but he remembers the last time the two of them met. It was on a winter day just after noon. It was sunny. The light was so sharp it was like putting on glasses. It improved vision. "How you doing?" John said. He was wearing a beret, a black leather jacket, and black pants. His face looked pasty and half-risen, dough not yet ready to bake. Even his voice seemed yeasty, as if a cheap beer was brewing in his intestines. "Let's go for a coffee sometime," he said. In a month he was dead. Matz clambers on top of the viaduct's thick rail. Suddenly seeing the precipitous drop on the far side, a fantastic rush of fear surges through him. He is so scared that he feels he might simply fall from frightened imbalance. But then he centers himself and straddles the rail so that he won't lose balance. And there he sits for 3 minutes, one leg on either side of the rail, and wondering whether he has the guts to live fully and jump. A woman passing him looks at him with urban apprehension. She's carrying 2 bags of groceries. She's middle-aged. She has the frightened expression of a teacher in a violent school. Mats ignores her and looks down at the gloom of the small river. "Are you all right?" the woman says. Her voice is distant. She has turned around, but she's still a few yards away from him, afraid of getting closer. "I'm fine," Matt says. His first reaction is anger. The woman is meddlesome. She can't see that he, like an acrobat, is concentrating. Son to mother, "I'm busy!" He glares furiously at her. She doesn't move, however, and so Matt sullenly clambers back to the sidewalk. Now, standing again on cement, he feels a great involuntary relief. Not wanting the woman to see this, he quickly leans down to pick up his backpack. "You looked sad," the woman is saying. She's closer now. Matt starts to mutter a grouchy, polite, "Yeah, well." His voice trails off. He looks at the woman. She's very plain. She has a slight scar on her cheek, as if she's been burned in an accident. Then suddenly it occurs to Matt that she's always been dismissed by others as quickly as he's dismissing her. This seems very moving to him. He feels disproportionately choked up. He tells himself it's because he's still gunned with adrenaline. Nonetheless, a little blade seems to cut his heart. He walks away quickly, afraid he'll lose control of himself. When he gets to the subway station, he settles down. He looks at the crowd around him, especially the women. For the first time he can remember, he looks at all the women, the older ones as well as the young, the homely as well as the beautiful. The anonymity of most people strikes him, the way in which life is unrewarded by the minor fame of attention. By the time Mats gets home, he's frigid. He slams the door of the semi-dilapidated house he lives in shut. But being inside doesn't warm him up very much. The Victorian wallpaper of the hall and dark brown wood of the door also seem cold. The house is very cold and quiet. None of his roommates are home. All the lights are out. Then the asthmatic furnace in the basement kicks in and starts to wheeze air out of the vents. Matt listens to it. His breathing is very shallow. This makes the coal penetrate deeper into his chest. Then warmth starts to bloom inside of him. Matt feels his heart generate a burst of heat. It's pleasant, the way opening an oven door is pleasant, but it doesn't stop. The heat rises up his spine where it infiltrates his brain and cerebellum and tear ducts. As if viewing his body externally, he can step back from himself and see a thin, eccentric figure wearing a grubby parka standing in a dark hall. He can see that his face is too thin, that an immense splotch of eczema travels from his forehead to his lips. He has 2 pimples and, on his neck, a purple scar from a third. His hair is thinning. He looks like a homeless monk. His disposability strikes him. He is virtuous, but he is garbage. And it's at this moment of self-loathing that he realizes even though he is nothing, he is still, from some point of view he can't put his finger on, loved. And, almost as if he's taken a gun and pressed it against his temple, his rapid movement from self-hate to self-acceptance triggers sadness, and he starts to cry.
Next station is Hyde Park Station.